So, obviously, one big area that the new Labour government have told us about is implementing plans and new legislation to protect workers' rights. And we've been waiting for any detail on that, although they did say that this was going to be part of their first 100 days of action. So I'm not quite sure how many days we are through so far, but we must be at least halfway through that first 100 days. So we're still waiting with anticipation. However, they have made one relatively small announcement in this area, which frankly is quite a bizarre area, and I guess says quite a lot about what their own personal priorities are, because what they're talking about is working from home. And presenteeism. And presenteeism being where there's an expectation that workers are physically present in a specific location to undertake their work, as opposed to maybe having more freedom or flexibility in terms of where or when they're actually doing their work. So again, a Prime Minister spokesman has made this announcement, which has been covered across various press. There's an article in the Telegraph. Interestingly, there's also an article on it in the Civil Service News. Shock horror, this is an area that they're particularly interested in. And they're kind of coming from the perspective of what they have previously mentioned, and this is basically the right to switch off. So the right for a worker not to be contacted outside of their normal working hours by their manager or by their employer. Now, really, is this a significant problem? Is this a significant issue? They're talking about flexibility, they're talking about burnout, they're talking about improving productivity. So the Labour government's priority in improving and tackling productivity issues in the economy is to start talking about working from home and presenteeism. Now, is it too much to expect that our government will be making decisions based on evidence, that their decisions are evidence-based? I would be very interested to see where is the evidence of a problem of managers contacting staff outside of normal working hours being a key factor in hampering productivity across the economy. It just seems utterly bizarre. And I think, as I've said before, to me, this is an issue that's being pushed ideologically from the trade unions, and the government is trying to retrofit justification to it. The union is pressurising us to do X, Y, or Z, or how are we going to justify doing that? We can't be clear and open and honest and saying, well, our paymasters that are paying us all tens of thousands of pounds each individually as MPs, which is, another outrage in it. How can we put forward this to the country and justify this to the country? We'll put it under a productivity banner. But again, where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that people are being called regularly outside of hours, that directly is leading to burnout? It just seems odd. It seems arse about it. And, I don't think they're being open and honest to us. And another thing that I often think about is that this obsession now from our government, often from the press, about working from home. Now, it is a specific slither of the total workforce that would ever even have the luxury of being able to work from home. If you work in retail, care, construction, agriculture, horticulture, hospitality, transport, great swathes of our workforce would, this is just simply not something that's ever going to be available to them. Yet, it's the government's first priority.
Yeah,
which again shows me it's probably coming from the civil service. It's coming from the unions on an issue which really isn't, has no relevance for the vast majority of the workforce.
Well, it's another one of these polarizing issues, isn't it? And, the latest Labour government seems to specialise in polarizing issues. Christ save us. And it's been, 5 weeks, 6 weeks now? And where are we? What's been going on? It seems like an eternity. But anyway, I think you're absolutely right. Where's the evidence? And the other thing here, Steve, is that this does feel like very much like a professional class problem. If you are fortunate enough to have a job and a level of seniority that allows you to sit on your backside at home working, then, bully for you. But it doesn't help if you're a Tesco's delivery driver, if you work in the, fixing electricity pylons to facilitate my work in my hill farm in Northumberland. So there's this sort of division that's going on here. And how this can be a priority is extraordinary to me. I think one of the things that concerns me about this is that since COVID, this working from home has become something that's been increasingly common. And it's divided the nation and it's polarizing the nation because people are now, like everything else, are coming at it from ideological angles, as you say. Now, in my experience of this, as a workforce deployment specialist, which is actually my day job when I'm not ranting about the news, is that there are some very strong arguments to have people working from home. It can improve productivity, but there are trade-offs against it. And some of the trade-offs against it are that it actually can end up with situations where the more conscientious workers do end up pulling 16-hour days. And because they haven't developed the self-discipline to switch off, and because their managers haven't understood that there's already legislation in existence that stops you from pestering your employees at 10 o'clock at night. That already exists. Why do we need more legislation? But I think this whole idea about working from home, it needs to be discussed as a nation in Parliament sensibly with evidence-based arguments, not
and with equal input and evidence and
Exactly.
contribution from the business world as from the trade union movement.
Because one of the major problems that the Starmer's missing out on here, and I think it's probably because nobody on the Labour front bench, with the exception of maybe the prison minister, has any experience of ever running a business, is that businesses, funnily enough, most activities within the workplace are not things you can necessarily be taught at university. And even if you are taught them at university, on-the-job experience is essential. How are you going to develop the skills and the working disciplines and the nuances around the ways you interact with your colleagues in young workers if you're not going to have face-to-face interaction with those young workers for at least a majority proportion of their time? If you take all the experienced people out of the office and just have young people in there, you're letting them flounder. And nobody's answered that question yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was going to sort of add that, even where working from home is a possibility and it can be effective, I think the most important thing it requires is strong, effective line management, even more so than when you're managing a team that are present in front of you. And it is so important for some of the things we've spoken about before: collaboration, cooperation, creativity, team building, learning. And as you said, for new people, when you think about induction and probation of people into a job, having that face-to-face contact and experience is so important, particularly for the young folk who are joining the workplace for the first time, to pick up all those little things that you pick up when you're starting in the workplace, the rules around workplace etiquette, just being a sponge to information and learning that, you get equally at the water cooler than you get in a formal morning's afternoon training session.
Yeah.
So important. So, it needs very strong management to make it effective. I just thought of some things, so in addition to, things like an induction and probation, enforcing and making it mandatory that, you can work from home down the line, but now you need to be in the office to learn those things. Having daily regular team catch-ups with your team, making actual physical attendance in the office for regular team meetings, for collaboration meetings, mandatory. But of course, I know from the civil service experience, there's just nothing but pushback on this. And I think the last government did say that they had an expectation that the civil servants attended the office 60% of their time. Well, I mean, I think in a recent article, it's more 17%, or that only 17% of civil servants are in the office on any one day. It's not being managed. And I can't remember which union it is, but there's likely industrial action in Office for National Statistics, because that seems to be one civil service department that's particularly pushing back against any level of expectation. So, it's looking like that's going to be another reason for further industrial action under the new government.
Yeah, it's a real worry, and I think it also furthers divide, you know, pushes this divide between those people who are employed and those people who employ. That it's ignoring the fact that there have been well over 100 years there have been jobs that are remote from the office.
Yeah,
Any sales or any organization selling
yeah.
anything has salespeople scattered all over the country, and you know what? Those working patterns have been well and truly established in our working environment for decades. Just because somebody who sits in an office at Westminster has never encountered them before doesn't mean to say that they don't exist. They do exist. If you work at a national
Mm.
company, then chances are you're going to be based out in the region somewhere, because a lot of national companies these days realized a long time ago that if you scatter your senior management teams and your management teams around the country rather than having them all in the one place, they're far better placed to interact with the frontline workforce than they are if they're in a head office in London or in Milton Keynes. So,
That's a,
this has been going on for a long time.
that's a very good point. You know, they exist and they're operating very effectively. Is the government speaking to those businesses to learn from their experience? What things do you need in place to make it work? You know, very effective.
Many years ago, a friend of mine went to work for Whitbread as a regional salesman, and they gave him his Renault Laguna and his 25 grand a year and his bonus, whatever. And they sent him off with a case of lager to go and sell Heineken to, or whichever beer it was, I can't remember which one it was, to grocer shops around central Scotland. Now, he spent the first month of his time at Whitbread being taught how to manage his time when he's working alone, how to balance work and home life. That
Yeah.
was a training course. That's a training course you give people who are young salespeople and working remotely. When I first set up my first business, I nearly had a nervous breakdown because I was sitting at home all the time, working all the time, and nobody was saying, stop, no one was saying, right, you got to switch off now, you got to stop. Now, anybody who runs a business knows you never actually switch off. What you do is you develop a capacity to turn down the volume. You turn down the volume so it's always there. And you need to have that because there are emergencies that you need to step into. There's situations where you need to, where actually suddenly you might have a really good idea and you actually, well, I've got to write that down before I forget it. If you're running your own business, you're thinking about work all the time. That's part of running your own business. Not everybody wants to do that. Okay. That's absolutely fine. But my point is, as Steve said, is, this already exists. We don't need more legislation. We don't need more regulation. We don't need more micromanagement in how people run their businesses. We all know. Here's a funny one. As somebody who's run many businesses, I know that if I overwork my staff and they get burnt out, they won't be productive. So do you know what? I don't overwork them.
Yeah, I mean, it was strange because in the detail of the statement from the Prime Minister's spokesperson, at one point it talks about we're going to be producing guidance. Well, okay, fine, guidance is guidance. But then on the other hand, they're talking about legislation and legal statutory requirements. So, what's it going to be? One or the other.
Yeah.
And you could say if it's just guidance, really, is that something that the government needs to be involved in and spending
Well,
its first
exactly.
100 days talking about?
And to our business owner networks, if you're wondering why you only get to keep about 670p for every tenner you make, well, this is why. Because all your money's going on funding this sort of nonsense. It's
Yeah.
absolutely extraordinary. Man,
So,
oh.
so Richard, you wanted to talk about something else as well.
Yeah, so this isn't really an HR related subject. This is more for our general small business owners, and this is an example of the callousness of government red tape and the impact that it has on small businesses. Now, we know we were promised once we'd left the European Union we'd be able to have a bonfire of red tape, and in fact, what seems to have happened is gone the opposite way, and we've got more red tape than ever. And the Labour Party wants to put in even more red tape. Anyway, there's a bit of news that's very sad. Those of you who may be of a certain age will remember that there was a time when you used to be able to buy model steam engines. There are only two companies that still make them, and one of those companies today announced that they were going out of business. And they were going out of business because the fuel they make to run their model steam engines has been identified by some bureaucrats in Westminster as being a possible substance that could be used to make bombs by terrorists. So this is hexamine. Anybody who's ever been on in the services will know this because it's a fuel that you use to put in your little folding stoves to bring up your tea. It's something that's used for running models. It's a safe, long-burning solid fuel. And in these little steam engines, you light your hexi, you stick it under the boiler, it boils the water in the boiler, and your little steam engine chugs across the kitchen floor. That's how it works. Mamod, this company, been in business since 1930s, well loved amongst the community they work in. Reasonable turnover internationally, well respected for their models. They heard about this ban coming in, and they tried to get attention from those responsible for the ban and from the various business organizations who are meant to support them and from their local MP, saying that this would actually really hurt their business. And could there be some way of looking at this to perhaps create a license system or some other type of approach they could use? Or had there actually been an actual risk analysis done as to whether or not this would be used? Because I know with things like nitrogen fertilizers, for instance, whilst they're regulated, because they're an essential component of our agricultural system, if I look out my window and look at those fields, I know they are because they've got nitrogen on them, then the distribution is heavily licensed and heavily controlled. Could that not be done in the same way with hexi? What seems to have happened is that Mamod got a wall of silence. And this, I think, is what my point here, Steve, is that we want to represent small businesses in the no-nonsense business network. And time again, we've seen small businesses being crushed under the weight of red tape and bureaucracy that's coming down from the state, from local authority, when often there doesn't seem to be any justification, particularly for this, or it seems to be done in a heavy-handed way that does not appreciate or understand the nuances of what they are trying to do here. Now, I mean, another really good example of this, for instance, is in machete laws. Now, there's a lot of concern in the public about knife crime at the moment, quite right so. There's a lot of headlines about machetes, quite right so. But banning all bladed items of that type is going to impact an awful lot of rural businesses and rural activities where, because not so much machetes, but bill hooks are used in hedging. Those hedges out there that the people who come out of the Westminster every now and again on their holidays to have a nice walk around the country, they don't grow themselves. They have to be managed, and they have to be managed by hands. You can't really do it with machinery, and that involves getting in there with a bill hook and trimming the hedge. That's what they're for. Bill hooks have been developed as being the best tool for this over hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, they're even superior to chainsaws. I know this because I do hedging myself. Now, the manufacturers of these tools are usually very small blacksmiths. They're usually making regional varieties and that have developed over the centuries as part of our heritage. And yet they are now facing a situation where an online ban of selling these tools will effectively put them out of business and destroy hundreds of years worth of that regional activity. Again, there's ways of managing this that don't involve this zero tolerance approach that Westminster seems to be so fond of. And again, we're seeing small businesses being persecuted by the state, which is meant to be there to facilitate trade, and instead is loading them with so many chains of bureaucracy that they can't cope any longer. And in fact, Steve, one of the bits of chat that we get from a lot of our people, a lot of small business owners, is I'm not sure this is worth it anymore. I'm not sure it's worth it anymore. Now, that's a serious concern that's been ignored by the government, who seem to be going full steam ahead with their policies to allow the unions into small businesses. This is on the agenda. And the reason why is because 62% of British people work in SMEs, and the unions have always seen this as a nice fat cash cow. But, if this goes ahead, you're going to have situations where trade union shop stewards will be in small businesses interfacing with small business owners. Now, this is a big problem. So these businesses in our country are the engine room of our economy. And if Labour's not very, very careful here, they could actually end up completely crashing it. We've already got a situation where this red tape massively loads the dice in favour of big business, who can take advantage of economies of scale. They can take advantage of the fact they've got accounts departments and HR teams. Every single bit of bureaucracy you bring in is another chain around the neck of a small business owner who's invariably got to do that themselves or pay for somebody else to do it. So my question here, Steve, is what on earth are organizations like the Federation of Small Business doing about this? I've not really heard much from them at all. They charge a lot for their membership, and whilst they seem to give some advice, in the practicalities of running a business, where's the representation? Is it time for small businesses to unionize themselves? And this is what we think maybe the No Nonsense Business Network could be. So if you're interested, get in touch with us, please. We need to make a stand.
Cool. Okie doke. So that's another wrap. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Goodbye.
Goodbye.